Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. On behalf of the Environmental Finance Center Network, welcome to another webinar in our Finding a Unicorn Small Wastewater System Funding Series. Today's session is on State Revolving Funds, Navigating CWSRF for Your Project. My name is Zoe Eisel from the Syracuse University Environmental Finance Center. Before we begin, we're going to go over a few logistics and then we can get started. During the webinar today, everyone will be kept on mute to ensure audio quality. If you have a question, please type it into the GoToWebinar question box anytime throughout the session. We will be saving your questions for a facilitated Q&A session at the end of the presentation. GoToWebinar has recently gone through an update, and you can now add live captions, raise your hand, or react using emojis. After the webinar, you will receive a follow-up email that includes a link to the recording and any other information you may need. You can also download the slides from today in the Handouts tab or Materials tab in your GoToWebinar control panel. This webinar has not been submitted for pre-approval of continuing education credits, but eligible attendees will receive a certificate of attendance for their personal record. To receive a certificate for this session, you must attend for the entire session and register and attend individually using your real name and unique email address. Certificates will be sent via email within 30 days of the webinar date. If you have questions or need assistance, please contact smallsystems@syr.edu. Now for a little bit about us. The Environmental Finance Center Network provides training and technical assistance for small water and wastewater systems in all U.S. states and territories through our building technical, managerial, and finance capacity programs. If your community or utility needs assistance with drinking water or wastewater system management, please feel free to contact us through our request form, which I will be sharing shortly in the chat. One of the many ways EFCN can support your community or utility is through our free funding application support. Struggling with an infrastructure funding application, falling short on project funding, not sure where to start? EFCN is here to help. Use the link in the chat to submit a request and receive tailored support based on your project's needs. And on that note, we can get started. I would like to introduce our presenters for today, Kathleen Kirkpatrick, Senior Associate, and Carmen Guzman-Simpliciano, Manager for Hawaii and Pacific Islands, both from Capacity Collaborative. Welcome, Kathleen and Carmen, and I will go ahead and hand it over to you.
Thank you, Zoe. And here I'm gonna, yep. There we go. They're sharing. It looks like we are good to go. All right, yeah, so we're trying a slightly different window today. Thanks everyone for being here. Just to reiterate, this is part 2 of our 2 sessions focusing on the State Revolving Fund. This is intended for small systems and small wastewater systems. So I will say that if you're looking at drinking water SRF, you'll probably pick up a good few tips here as well. So this is me and Carmen, who you've already met. I'm located in Montgomery, Alabama, and Carmen is in Hawaii. So even though we're at opposite sides of the country, we collaborate on a lot of good stuff. So just to reiterate, this is part of a 12-part series that's really designed for small wastewater systems. And we know that a lot of small systems, especially in our rural and tribal communities, struggle with the capacity to pursue larger pots of funding. So the series is designed to get you from start to finish, preparing to put together a project proposal all the way through managing federal funds. If you haven't taken part in some of our earlier sessions, it's actually pretty easy to find on the ESCN website, because all you have to do is search on the keyword unicorn. As I've been trying to share links, that's been a great way to make a shortcut. So you can also search for Capacity Collaborative and find them that way. So today we're on session number 5, the second in our Clean Water SRF pursuit sessions, I will caution you that because this is for a national audience and because Clean Water SRF is really largely for implemented to state level, just know that in advance. We're going to use some examples for a specific state, but you should be able to use the same process for your state as well. And I encourage you, if you have questions after this or after some of our preceding sessions, sign up for our office hours coming up in a couple of weeks, and we'll share the link for registration for that here at the end. So today, we're going to do a quick poll so we can get a better sense for who's in the live audience today. We'll help you find your state-specific information, based on your location, how to track where the SRF, specifically the Clean Water SRF allocations come from, roughly how much is available, intended use plans or IUPs, one of those crazy acronyms that there are so many of in this program. But get a sense for the intended use plans, how your state establishes criteria for projects to select, and how you can actually weigh in with public comments. And then we'll also make sure that you have some ideas where to find examples of projects that were previously funded, because that can be a really good way to get a sense for where you're going to fall on the priorities list and help you prepare to get farther up the list and get your funding that you're after. All right. So Zoe, if you would launch the first poll question, I'd appreciate it. We've had a lot of people register for these sessions, which is terrific. And it's a really broad, diverse bunch of folks. So it's fun to watch the poll. Very dynamic here. Oh boy. So some of you that have been through the Clean Water SRF process before, please weigh in, and we'll have plenty of room at the end of this session to have a chat about that. Give it a little time. So yeah, it looks like we've got some great Clean Water SRF knowledge already on board, but it's still quite a few that are just getting started. Maybe a few of you have used the information we presented last time to look up some of those contacts, which was great. So next question. What's your interest? Why are you interested in Clean Water SRF? If you're still struggling for what that acronym is, you're in a good place, because we're going to keep this pretty basic, but we'll also have some good information. It's been interesting to see how folks from state agencies have been signing up, and we got some great feedback last time about how those participants appreciated seeing resources about how SRF is managed in other states. So I think that's a great way to share some of that knowledge too. Okay, good. We've got lots of small systems are racing ahead. I feel like this is a little bit of a horse race in the polls, which is fun to watch. So far, the small wastewater systems looking for funding are winning out. That's great. So today, I think you'll probably pick up a few ideas. If you've never done this before, I'm glad that nobody's selected what's that acronym. So it means you're learning something from us. That's great. Okay, so the doesn't look like everybody voted in this one. We're going to charge ahead here. As Zoe said, feel free to put your questions in the chat, and we'll try to get back to those towards the end and have a discussion. If we don't get to your question today, never fear. We've got office hours coming up in a couple of weeks, so we can always follow up with you via email too. So a brief recap on how the money flows for the State Revolving Fund program. Starts at the federal level with congressional appropriations. Do you have an update for you today on FY 2026 appropriations, although it's pretty high level. EPA makes allotments to the states, tribes, and territories. The regional SRF program staffs at EPA, at each of the EPA 10 regions, they review and approve state intended use plans, and that's what happens at the federal level. At the state level, the state and agencies develop the IUPs. There's a public comment period. There's different methods for soliciting project applications or letters of interest. Keep in mind that public comment period, those are for all of us, either applicants or advocacy groups or just community members to weigh in on. But ultimately, projects are selected from this project priorities list that's developed along with the IUP. At the local level, and this is where a lot of you fall, you're responsible for asset management and planning and getting your project proposals ready to go based on local needs and consulting your local community members and various stakeholders. You should be reviewing the IUPs and potentially comment on those and understanding when those comment periods occur. Big piece of this, you'll see I've highlighted financial reports, really important to get your fiscal house in order. You'll be implementing the project, perhaps with assistance from other state agencies or local agencies or engineers, lots of players in this game. And then ultimately loan repayment or educating your ratepayers about where the funding is coming from and how that may or may not affect your local rates. For those that haven't seen it before, here's my favorite roadmap. This was produced by River Network a couple of years ago, specifically about the State Revolving Fund program. And it's got a great color-coded key for, and I know it may be hard to see on the screen here, but we've got a link to the reference at the end so you can download it. There's nice color key for the process and the way that the funding flows, moves through the process ultimately. And again, this is a revolving fund. Loan payments that are repaid into the state fund are then made available for future projects, right? That's what makes it a revolving fund. That's assuming that there's not principal forgiveness, something we talked a little bit about last time, the opportunity for having a portion of your loan essentially forgiven. All right, so how much funding is available? Every year, Congress, on varying schedules, I think we've all heard about continuing resolutions and final budget packages, that sort of thing in the last few years. Excuse me. Congress allocates funding for EPA. Within that funding bill, there are specific lines for SRF. The regions will make those allocations to the state. Again, state agencies help determine which projects get funded, but they don't just pick them out of thin air. You got to apply. If you're representing a community, a small wastewater system, you actually have to apply for this funding following your state guidelines and federal guidelines that they operate within to make sure that you even get on the list. So they're not necessarily going to come to you. I'm going to apologize in advance for some very dense slides coming up. Rather than trying to show you on a very dynamic screen, I wanted to make sure that everyone had slides available with hyperlinks so you can replicate this process to research for your state, okay? But just as an example, this is a screen grab from the Clean Water, specifically Clean Water State Revolving Fund allotment on the EPA website. If you see an underlined and highlighted link on any of these pages and in the PDF that you're able to download with this session, that's a hyperlink. It will go to the page that this screen grab is from. So what may be hard to see on these screens is that it actually lists all of the Clean Water SRF allocations all the way back to, I think it's 2017, maybe 2013. And these are all PDFs. They're very dense, but there's so much good information in there. This is at the national level. So it actually shows the allocations and the summary in a very large PDF of all of the funding that's been allocated to the individual state programs. I'll stop here to remind everyone that there's clean water SRF, there's drinking water SRF, and then there's also some other supplemental SRF pots of funding. So, in the most recent one for which we have details in FY25, and that's the federal fiscal year 2025, which starts in October of calendar year 2024. And to make things even more complicated, those allocations, because the budget bills haven't necessarily passed at the time that they're intended to, everything gets pushed out. So when you're looking up information for your state, you may see FY 2025 information, much of which is still in play. So it depends on your state, getting to know the information on your state's website and getting to know your state agency staff that's managing the SRF programs is super beneficial. I pulled up an example here for Colorado for 2025. That base funding amount, which is over $12 million, was supplemented in 2025 by the IIJA, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act. So I wanted you to just focus on that base amount, which in this case is over $12 million. The supplement from the infrastructure bill was more than that amount. And then there were some additional supplements just specifically for emerging contaminants like PFAS. But that made the grand total for FY25 just for Colorado more than double the base allocation. So just keep that in mind. The total SRF appropriation nationwide for FY 2025 for the federal fiscal year 2025 was, and I've got the number written down here because I knew it would be really tiny here. It's $1,638,861,000. Seems like a lot. We know that there's a lot of deferred maintenance and other issues and like new issues to address with our wastewater systems. So it's more than a drop in the bucket, but it's an awful lot of funding that may not cover everything. So you've got to be competitive with your proposals and really think strategically about your projects and be prepared to be competitive for this funding. If you look in the very lower right-hand corner, the fiscal year 2025 grand total at the federal level was over $4 billion. So again, that's more than double the clean water SRF base amount. I don't want to get too much in the weeds on this, but it's going to become relevant here in just a moment. What are we looking at for the future? I already said that the fiscal year 2025, a lot of that funding is still in play. And really, even previous years to that, it's a revolving program. A lot of the infrastructure bill funding that went to the states, I would wager, and this is just my opinion, that a lot of that really was allocated so it could be sent to project funding at very, very low repayment rates, or perhaps for principal forgiveness, because there was wide recognition that especially a lot of our small systems really weren't in a position to repay in a conventional sense. So they were given more opportunities for principal forgiveness. That may not be the case in the future because we're looking at the baseline amounts. I'm pleased to say that just last week, House Resolution 6938 passed, and it was signed into law just a few short days ago. I tried to look into this to see if I could glean a little bit more, but it's not easy to settle all this out into the state. So watch for that information as it continues to roll out. But one thing I really wanted to point out is that if you look at that very large number, the 1.6 yada yada billion dollars for clean water SRF, that appears to be level to the funding for that base amount in fiscal year 2025. One thing that is not clear yet, and I'm just going to say this is very not entirely preliminary, but my understanding based on what I've been trying to keep up with recently is that some special congressional allocations may come out of that base amount from for your state. So just be mindful of that. I wouldn't assume that there will be a lot of supplements to the base amount for FY 2026. And we're really just getting started on this. But I'm pleased to say that that $1.6 billion is significantly more than had been suggested earlier in the year. So that's a great thing for the Clean Water SRF and the Drinking Water SRF programs as well. I've included the link here to HR 6938 as it was signed. So if you really want to have fun digging into 75 plus pages of tables and charts and lots of legal information, have at it. What I did is I just pulled up the PDF and I did a quick search on Clean Water SRF. And that's what you see here on the screen grab. It was pretty interesting to go through that. So now, getting into more of the nitty gritty. I used Mississippi as an example. Every state is a little bit different. A lot of them have common traits. Keep in mind that in each state, there may be a single agency or multiple agencies that are involved. I know in some states, there's, for instance, like the Department of Public Health may be involved in some extent. I know that's true in Hawaii. But with the Clean Water SRF programs, it tends to be the state's environmental agency. This screenshot from Mississippi comes from the EFC network funding sources by state or territory directory. This was produced in 2024 and is really well done research that gets you right down to the essence of the information that you need. Those tables also contain a lot of the information about other potential funding sources. But if you want to look specifically for the Clean Water SRF program, you can go right to these charts. It will show you how to apply, is in that third from the right column. And so here's an example that I pulled so it's a little bit easier to look at. It lays it all right there for you. It tells you who's eligible, how you can apply, and some of the fundamental requirements to get involved with funding from the Clean Water SRF in your state. So here's your example for Mississippi. I think this is pretty typical. They want you to hire a consulting engineer that's licensed and registered in your state. They suggest contacting, obviously depending on what's involved with your project, contacting people in the construction branch of the state agency. The third item, arranging a pre-planning conference. If you're on our previous session, what do they keep saying? Like every slide, get to know your state agency. This is why you need to get to know them. So you can arrange these pre-planning conferences and ask questions. They don't expect you to come to the table knowing everything you possibly need to know. And I dare say that there are folks at the state agencies that are learning a lot of this too. I think that's why we've got some of them on these calls. They want to see how it's being done in other states and develop a broader understanding of the Clean Water SRF program overall. So that's one example from the state of Mississippi. It's going to vary by state, but it's a great way to get started. And just, I encourage you, maybe even just look through some of the state tables at that EFCN landing page, just to see what's going on other states too. And even though all of those tables look very similar, and there's that how to apply column and then a contact list. You might pick up some ideas too. When you click through from the state table to see what's going on in each state, I was, I wouldn't say surprised, but I was really encouraged to find that when I clicked through, the information was very well organized and has essentially a laundry list of all of the things that you need to get started. And I know that these SRF programs can seem very complicated. They really don't have to be. There's a lot of information that's required. I mean, these are federally funded programs with taxpayer dollars being contributed, and everybody needs to be accountable for the funding and where it's going, right? So on the Mississippi example, they had a really nice sort of summary and a background about the SRF program in general. That same information about how to get started, which I've circled here in red. So it's not necessarily a checklist, but it's more of a process. The other thing that I thought was really handy on this particular state's website for the Clean Water SRF was a whole list of documents. Some of those were PDFs, but they had a lot of historical information going back into previous years, which you could use to research what sort of projects had been funding and get a sense for what the priorities are. That doesn't discount the need to actually read through the current intended use plan to identify what the most current strategies and priorities are for that state's funding allocation. So, I mean, it's a balance. I think like applying for any other source of funding, whether it's private funding or state or federal funding, it's always smart to get a sense for what has previously been funded, because it kind of gives you an idea for where they're headed. But that can change. So use your up-to-date information. But this is a really nice summary, and it's a very long page. There was no way to get a screen grab for all of it. So you've got a little bit of a summary there. But the documents and the background and the history were really terrific for this one. So let's talk about intended use plans. What the heck do they look like? They may look a little bit different from one to the next. In Mississippi, the first thing that you find when you click through to the document section is actually the public notice of the draft intended use plan. And they included in that same notification what the comment period is for folks to weigh in on comments. And they even, not all states do this, they actually included information about a public hearing. So rather than waiting, as they do in some states, for people to request a hearing on the draft IUP, they just went ahead and scheduled one. So I know we got the question last time, like what can state agencies do to make the process flow or help people understand it better? I think go beyond the minimum required comment periods, but really encourage systems and consultants and engineers to become familiar with the information even before it hits the draft IUP. I know that's challenging and a lot of us are struggling with capacity, but if you can do things to educate the end users and stakeholders before it comes down to the comment periods, that's always a good thing. And you don't want any surprises at a public hearing anyway, right? I've worked for a federal agency. The last thing we wanted was a total surprise at a hearing. If you're doing some stakeholder engagement up front, less surprises later. The other piece that was very well stated in this, was very clear, was how to get a copy. The draft IUP is, I think in this case, was over 100 pages. And it's a lot to look at, but it's also pretty well organized. Here's an example of this is the title page from the Mississippi FY 2025 draft IUP. And I just put in bullet points here some of the key components. It goes through like a summary of the year program, which goes into more depth than what you see on the website. It's like multiple pages. There's a table of contents, of course. I mean, like any funding program, like an RFP, or in the case of federal NOFAs, a notice of funding opportunity. Read the whole thing. It seems like a lot, but if you read it from start to finish, I'm kind of old school. I print out copies and I highlight and tab everything, so I know that I haven't missed something. And you don't want to get caught short. Asking questions about something that's already there. Do your research. So this particular Mississippi draft IEP had a great summary of the program, an explanation of the funds that are available for each particular category, and then many of the pages of the overall document are a priority list. And those are documented along with demographics for the systems which are on the list. How you get on that list varies somewhat, but you can find out that information from the state, and it's pretty fascinating to see the different categories that are broken out and the demographics associated with them. And I think it will become clear sort of what you can do to ensure that your project is competitive and gets higher up the list for priority funding. Another thing that was really interesting about this one is the way they categorize planning lists. So I don't know if we have anybody here from Mississippi, but it was great to see the way they laid out the planning list for the future. In other words, if you're not on the priority list for the current funding cycle, they've got planning lists for the future because there's only so much capital available, right? Something to keep in mind: if, say, you've got 100 projects that the state has on the priority list and they're going to fund, they're saying they've got the available funds to do either a conventional SRF loan program or maybe even some principal forgiveness, they will say how much money is being allocated where. But then what happens to the rest of the projects on the list? Just because you fall farther down the list doesn't necessarily mean you're not going to get funded, because the ones higher up the list may hit a snag. There's any number of things that can not necessarily go wrong, but be delayed. So I know we've seen, for instance, here in Alabama, with the holdover from some of the previous years, there was a bit of a rush in late calendar year 2025 to disperse some funds that hadn't been able to be obligated for various reasons, because a project wasn't able to start, or maybe there was an issue with some of the financials. So there's a lot of reasons that some of that funding may still come up. So it's like, hope is not lost. That's the underlying message. Just because your project isn't necessarily in the first cut, so to speak, doesn't mean that you're not going to get funding in that cycle. There's still that possibility, and almost anything can happen. So just be mindful of that whole process that's documented, and it's all laid out in the intended use plan. And as much as I stumble over the acronym IUP, it's a pretty good description of what it is. It's how we intend to use the funds, right? So that was a lot. We're about halfway in here. Just some things to please keep in mind. I just ran through very quickly some examples. Mentioned Colorado. We went a little bit more in depth for Mississippi. It may look different for your state. All the more reason, get to know your state agency, be prepared and ask a lot of questions. Do your research first. Again, state agencies, especially these days, are also pretty strapped for capacity. So if you do your research up front and really put together good questions, it's going to be easier for them to answer your questions. Do your stakeholder engagement. Work with your community so you really have a solid project plan. We've talked about that in some of our previous sessions. You can go back and watch those. They've all been recorded. And we're going to have office hours coming up in a couple of weeks as well. So never fear. There's help out there. Zoe also put in the chat earlier the link to the help form for Environmental Finance Center Network. So there's a lot of assistance available for small systems in particular. I don't know if anybody caught this, but that little unicorn, he's not actually a unicorn, he's a zebra. But he's pretending to be a unicorn, and he's figuring it out. But I thought that was just a fun way to say, it's like, hey, you know what? I'm not quite a unicorn yet, but we're getting there. So with that, I've done a lot of talking. I want to get Carmen to come off mic or turn on her mic here, and we'll just have a quick discussion and then take some questions. Carmen, I know when you and I first got into doing some of the research about SRF a couple of years ago, it seemed absolutely confusing and insurmountable. I'm not going to lie. It was like, wow, this is a lot. Yeah. We were both fortunate to be selected for some training with Guzman Network, which is great. I saw an amazing roadmap diagram that really helps get your head around it. But what tips do you have for researching the SRF program in your state?
For me, when I was attending the cohort, it was I went in blind, really, because even when I asked, the people around me or the state agencies, they didn't know anything about it. So I had to really dig deep and searching on our state's website and just going through every single link I could possibly find for information and how the process actually works. What are the scoring points that they look for? I already live in a disadvantaged community, so I knew right off the bat, we got those 15 points. But looking at like how you were mentioning, looking at the old projects and seeing how they put their application together was really helpful. Going into helping my community, it's called the Department of Hawaiian Homelands. It's a Native Hawaiian community with homes that we have. And that community is now applying through the SRF program. So it's good to go through the actual process with them, alongside them, to apply for the loan. And so the tips that I've learned, the links, what does the application look like? Do we need an environmental impact statement? There's things like, even before you apply for the loan, you got to have in check already. And so those links on your state's website should be really, really helpful. And it's just, clicking through and going down the rabbit hole is what I did.
Yeah, there's an awful lot of information out there, and that's why I really do encourage folks to take advantage of this large body of research that's been done already to help you by EFCN and others. There are some references and resources that we shared in our previous session a couple of weeks ago to get started with the basics of SRF. Those same references are appended to this slide deck that you can download as well. So you've got that information there. I did a quick test to see if, for instance, when I was looking at Mississippi as an example, if I just Googled Mississippi CWSRF, and I didn't go straight to the page that with a quick Google search, that I got to with the EFCN references. And I thought that was a good example of, use the resources that have already been assembled that you can tap into here, and it's going to save you a little time. And I think will probably save you, it would save me frustration and not being able to go straight to the information that you need. State and federal agencies, I know that like the EPA, Clean Water SRF website, there are so many links on that page, and some of them aren't working. So it's, the vast majority of them are. I haven't checked them all in a while, but you click through to something and it's like, wow, this is like 2017 information. I need something that I know is up to date. So EFCN's already like put in the work for you, for those tables that were created in 2024. That doesn't mean that something may not have changed. So just be diligent. And like Carmen said, it's so easy to go down a rabbit hole and find. Thank you, Zoe. Zoe's putting the link right there in the chat. That's such a great resource, and it's pretty dense. It's a lot of information, but there's hyperlinks in there so you can go straight to your state and drill down and find. You should be able to find pretty much what you need. I'm sorry to say that there's not just a simple checklist that's going to apply everywhere. I got that question recently from someone here in Alabama. It's like, can't you just like show me all the steps? It's like, well, I can help you draw a roadmap, but I'm not necessarily going to be able to put together a specific checklist just for your project until we learn more about your community. So that's kind of how things go. Carmen, did you have any other thoughts about, or just like tips and tricks, hints about how to find the good information for your state?
Well, in my community, we have also green infrastructure projects that I wanted to take up with my community. So it's not just the wastewater, it's other things that you can go after. And my state in particular has, it's called a 319 program. So it's specifically funding for green infrastructure. So you really don't have to go through SRF, but it's in kind of in the same department / separate grant program. So that's on this link that we dropped here. So hopefully in your state, if you're not just doing wastewater and you're doing green infrastructure, those links are helpful as well. Because
thank you so much for bringing that up. There are like set asides for or the capacity, within the federal guidance, there's allowance, and in some cases requirements for set asides for particular aspects related to infrastructure. Green stormwater infrastructure, green infrastructure in particular is one of those that stands out, and hopefully will continue to be wrapped into the program. And I know it's something that, like here in the Southeast, with increasing storms and a lot of stormwater issues, there's ways that perhaps think about wrapping green infrastructure in with a larger project need. Rather than thinking about it as a distinct separate project, you may actually have a better chance of getting it funded that way when it's part of an overall strategy. So I think that again, that's the sort of strategy that you could discuss with the state agency to see what they think, because they're ultimately the ones that are going to be reviewing your project. Okay, we've got about 15 minutes left. Zoe, what sort of questions do we have that might be good to tackle here in our last few minutes? Or we can even try to run through some other examples.
It looks like people have been holding off till the end to submit their questions, so I just want to give them a little bit of time And I encourage everyone to submit their questions via the questions tab on GoToWebinar.
While we're waiting, I can jump in and share a little story that I went through in our state. We have a wastewater project being run by our environmental service, EMV, and they're upgrading a system in Sand Island. So it's the opposite end of where I live. Um, it it startled me a little bit when I was going to the SRF cohort, because instead of going through the SRF program and receiving monies to keep the rate pay down, the rates down for ratepayers, they just immediately jumped to hiking up our sewer fees and didn't take advantage of the SRF program. So learning what I learned from the cohort, I was advocating on my community's behalf. Why did we not take advantage of that? Why tax the whole entire island for this upgrade, which my community doesn't benefit from, quite honestly.
Yeah.
And so when we ask those guys in charge, they're like, well, we just didn't do it. And that was shocking to hear that kind of answer. But knowing these things and even utilizing in that way to advocate for, communities like ours, like, man, they could have done better. But they do have a public comment, and that will be my comment, is why jump straight into raising our sewer fees rather than taking advantage of this program.
That's a really pertinent example, because I think a lot of systems really are very concerned these days about so many issues, and then we've got issues like emerging contaminants to deal with, not just with drinking water, but on the clean water side. And do the right thing by your ratepayers. And if for some reason there's a compelling need to finance the project in a way that's not through the SRF program, then tell your ratepayers, so they're not having to ask that question. Be transparent about that. Maybe have a public hearing. But yeah, and I think what happens sometimes is it's not. It might be a matter of timing. There are some programs for emergency response for like after after a hurricane, after tornadoes, like we see here a lot in the South. There may be a pool of funds, even related to SRF in some states, that can be tapped into for emergency projects. So be aware that those things exist too. But yeah, this whole issue of responding to ratepayers and being mindful of how utilizing the state revolving funds can actually be more cost effective and minimize or optimize your rate system. Maybe rates still need to go up a little bit, but maybe not as much if you can utilize SRF. And then if you've got principal forgiveness, that helps as well. And that comes in mostly in areas where there's particularly urgent needs or disadvantaged communities. How are we looking on questions? Do we have any coming in here? Surely we have questions.
Yes. The first question is there some preferred small system technology? Asking this because not all options I have seen have good field records.
Ooh, boy, that sounds like a really place-based, location-specific question. There's been a lot of innovation in wastewater systems, and confess I first started working in wastewater over 40 years ago now, and I've seen some changes. There's it really is going to depend on your specific location, like what options are
Mm-hmm.
available, and also the ability to tap into the loans. And yeah, it's hard to answer your question really is the bottom line, because it depends. I think that um, that's the best answer I can give you. I come to our office hours and tell us a little bit more about your local needs. So yeah, that's fine. Just bring it on, and let's have a conversation about your particular situation, and we can help you think about some solutions. That's a long-winded way of me saying I'm not sure, but let's have a conversation about it. Yeah. Any questions? I think we've given folks maybe a lot to think about, and so they're not having the specific questions. Just rest assured that there will be other opportunities to ask, and we can help you sort through the information for your location.
Yeah, if you'd like to maybe close out with, if you could only leave attendees with one piece of information today, what would you want their takeaway to be?
I would say do your research, but don't hesitate to ask questions. It's a seemingly complex system. It, you know, financial capacity is really important, but even if you haven't recently had an audit, that doesn't mean that it is lost. That's where technical assistance providers like the ESP network come through. Um, but yeah, I would say do your research. I'm gonna just scroll through really quickly. A reminder here: some of the references and resources that we've presented in the past. The EPA Clean Water SRF landing page is the one that has so many links. It can feel overwhelming, but I would say if you're just getting started and really want to like dig in and find where your state or territory information is, the third line on that page, that ESPN funding sources by state, the big state tables, it's fun. You get to click on the map for your location, and it pulls up a nice chart. And within that, there will be Clean Water SRF and Drinking Water SRF and a number of other funding resources. So I would start there, and then excuse me, I'll put some of the research, and like Carmen mentioned, the SRS cohort, that was the training that we went through with River Network, which was very helpful. It's from an advocate's point of view rather than from the system or the state agency. But I think it's sort of a great overview that's super useful, and they've got lots of good information. Epic, and some of their policy briefs. There are some states where they've done more research than others, just depending on their capacity. And then there are a lot of other technical assistance providers too that are presenting information about SRF, because we know it's really a fundamental resource for funding, especially for small and disadvantaged systems these days. Don't forget the ESC network link, where you can find help and get technical assistance, and even the EPA tools and training TA page is really great too. So don't hesitate to ask for help. You're not in this alone, and there are folks that have more experience or have more bandwidth to perhaps help you figure it out. And then come to our office hours. Those office hours that we have scheduled in a couple of weeks is for the previous run of our sessions up until now, and that will be yeah, we're eager to hear what questions you bring. If you want to submit in advance, that's fine, or just show up and hang out with us. We'll have a good chat. Several of our staff will be there, and some of the previous presenters as well, our colleagues from the Capacity Collaborative, to help you out and at least get you started and get you off on a good path to get your federal funding secured. All right, I think that's it.
Sounds good.
Any closing thoughts, Carmen?
No, I just shared the link for Hawaii in specific. We have different alternatives to wastewater or septic. Not sure how it's going to help that one last question, but these are just ideas. This is specifically for the state of Hawaii, but it could help, I hope.
Yeah, if for those of you who happen to be in the southern U.S., I know we have a lot of conversations here in the Deep South, especially about septic systems, failing septic systems in particular, and how like conventional septic, and interestingly enough, this was similar kind of case in much of Hawaii, conventional systems just don't work. So that may be where that question came from. There is a lot of really good technology out there, and I hesitate to even call it innovation. Sometimes just getting back to basics and operating like nature is a good outcome. All right, I guess that's it. Thank you all for being here. Hope you will sign up to be on some of our future webinars, and we'll help get you some answers and get you funding for your system.
Yeah, I'll close this out with a few final thoughts. Huge thank you to Kathleen and Carmen for sharing their expertise with us today. Following this webinar, you will receive a follow-up email with the slides from today and a link to the recording. We also ask that you complete the webinar evaluation form following the webinar so that you can let us know your thoughts on today's session, as this helps us plan future webinars on topics important to you. Thank you again, and we hope to see you at future EFCN events. Have a good day.
Aloha.